USC's athletic heritage, the New York Times selected Dr. Nikias as one of the small number of national figures who make sports' little corner of the world a better place. Please join me in welcoming the 11th president of the University of Southern California, Dr. C.L. Max Nikias. And I tell you, we love this guy.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Thanks very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Oh, it's nice to be here. Sometimes I feel I miss this group of people. Right, Isaac? Isaac Maya, by the way, who is with Create, he was one of my deputy directors back in the 1990s of the Integrated Media Systems Center, which was funded by the National Science Foundation. So it is my special pleasure to be able to spend some time with all of you today. I'm grateful to all of you for contributing your knowledge and insights to this important maritime risk symposium. I would like to thank the women and men of the United States Coast Guard for enabling us all to work together to scan the distant horizon for potential threats to our citizens' security and to address such threats proactively. I want to thank all of our organizers and speakers for leading these 2 days of important discussion. And I should also acknowledge a few of our very special guests. Vice Admiral Robert Parker, who is here, and the Vice Admiral Paul Zukunft. Zeke, okay. Rear Admiral Tom Jones is here with us, Matt Clark, and of course our keynote speaker, Dan Gerstein, that I'm going to introduce in a few minutes. I also want to thank Steve Hora for his leadership at Create, which plays such an active academic role in this crucial aspect of our national life. It was about 8 years ago that the Department of Homeland Security gave USC a grant to establish the first ever university-based center in the area of Homeland Security. And at that time, I was the dean of the USC Viterbi School of Engineering, and I was in charge of the site visit when we made it in the short list of finalists. And it was one of my proudest moments for USC to have been part of that process. In these uncertain times, I'm especially proud of how Create and so many other USC research units are pivotal to strengthening our nation's well-being. As our faculty work on improving Homeland Security, conducting state-of-the-art defense research, and training our troops and our military leaders. It's also my pleasure to introduce our very special keynote speaker today, Daniel M. Gerstein from the Department of Homeland Security. Dr. Gerstein has served as the Deputy Undersecretary for Science and Technology in DHS since August of 2011. Before joining DHS, he served as the Principal Director for Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction within the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Dr. Gerstein has decades of experience in the security and defense sectors. He has served as a senior executive service government civilian in uniform and in industry. He has served on 4 different continents, participating in Homeland Security and counterterrorism, peacekeeping, humanitarian assistance, and combat, in addition to serving for over a decade in the Pentagon in various high-level staff assignments. Dr. Gerstein has been an adjunct professor at the American University in Washington, D.C. at the School of International Service, where he teaches graduate-level courses on biological welfare and the evolution of military thought. He has been awarded numerous military and civilian awards, including an award from the Government of Colombia, the Department of State's Distinguished Service Award, and the United States Army Soldier's Medal for Heroism. Dr. Gerstein has published numerous books and articles on national security, biological warfare, and information technology. He has also served as a fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and is a current member of the Council. He holds degrees from the United States Military Academy at West Point, the Georgia Institute of Technology, the National Defense University, and George Mason University. It is therefore a great privilege for us to hear from him today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our very distinguished keynote speaker, Dr. Daniel Gerstein.
Well, that all makes me sound very old. Let me see if I can get my slides up. Well, thank you very much for that warm introduction. And before I get into my presentation, there are actually a number of people that I'd like to thank and recognize. So the first group that I'd like to recognize are the people who put this on. Thanking the University of Southern California, thanking the Create Center of Excellence, and the Coast Guard R&D Center. We wouldn't be here today without them. And also thanks and congratulations to the Coast Guard on sponsoring this and putting this great forum together. It's a really important forum, and glad to be able to be here. You know, this is a tough act to follow with the two vice admirals, and so I walked in just as Vice Admiral Parker was talking about, you know, whenever he goes somewhere, there's always a disaster. There was Katrina and then Haiti, and you know, he's going down the list, and I'm thinking they should stop moving this guy. And then, you know, he starts talking, and he's going through his domain. And next, and I'm going to say Admiral Z because I don't want to. So Admiral Z is talking about his domain, and he's got one side of the world, and Admiral Parker's got the other side of the world, and I'm thinking my domain is a desk, Vermont Avenue, Washington, D.C. What have I done wrong? So look, here's what I'm going to do today, and I see I've already advanced my slides. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start and talk a little bit about the Department of Homeland Security. I'm from Washington. I don't say that apologetically, but I'm going to talk from my vantage point from the departmental level and give you some idea of what it looks like from my perspective. It's not an operational perspective. So again, you know, you'll have to bear with that, but I think it'll be a different sort of, perhaps a more strategic discussion, and we'll bring it up just a little to a little higher level on the strategy for the department. I also then want to talk about science and technology and tell you a little bit about what Science and Technology Directorate does, but more broadly, what science and technology does for all of us. And I used to be an operator, so I can say this, when I was in the operational realm. So I hope to be able to share some of that with you. And then share with you some principles for how to think about this maritime risk. I think that's very important. And then finally, I'll share with you a couple of our programs. So I like to start presentations by giving you a couple disclaimers. And the first disclaimer I'll give is that I'm a recovering Department of Defense, which means I do use PowerPoints. They're way too complex, too many acronyms, but I think if you bear with me, most of you, given your backgrounds, will have seen a lot of these terms before, and so we'll bear through that. I am going to stay away from operations in my discussion to the maximum extent possible. There are too many experts in this room, and I certainly don't want to get out on a ledge where I can't get back in. So I'm going to stick to what I know best, and that is the science and technology piece. And I do apologize to several of you in the room. The Centers of Excellence were with me last week. We had a great session, and several of them have seen a couple of the slides that we're going to present. So as we get going on this, if I can get my pointer going back, here's the theme I'm going to develop for you throughout this briefing. The first is that, you know, as you think about maritime risk, we have to think about managing this idea of security versus the flow of illicit goods, services, and people. So that's number one. And then secondly, as we're thinking about balancing this maritime risk, we want to think about the importance of building resilience. And if we needed a reminder, Superstorm Sandy sort of put that in perspective for us. Having trouble with the pointer. Okay, so with that, I want to start at the strategic level, and at the strategic level, I'll just say that there is a lot of strategic guidance out there. And I've just pulled out a couple documents. I thought they might be useful to remind us of the importance of looking at that top level guidance. The first, the Homeland Security Act of 2002, it set up the department. It makes the department the newest cabinet level department. It also makes us a little over a decade old. And with that, I'll just come forward and say we have some growing to do, and we're maturing as a department in leaps and bounds. And I think the next document over, the QHSR, is a reflection of that maturity. I tongue-in-cheek say that the Department of Defense took 47 years to get a quadrennial defense review, and it only took us 8 years to get a quadrennial Homeland Security review. The good news here is that it brought us closer together as a department, and the other good news is that as we go forward and we begin to develop the QHSR for 2013 or 2014, we are doing a lot better in terms of coming together and identifying these coherent missions. As you go down and look at the quadrennial Homeland Security Review, the threats and the core missions, a couple points. First, they run the gambit. They're everything from the low-level terrorism all the way to high-level, high-consequence weapons of mass destruction and everything in between. It includes things like natural disasters. It includes pandemics. We've experienced several of those during this last administration or this current administration, and undoubtedly we will experience many more. When you look at our core missions, what I take away from this is we are really about being a culture of law enforcement and about helping the United States, helping the people of the United States. And so we also have a culture of border enforcement, customs enforcement, maritime security. These have become really, if you will, our core competencies. Now, number 4 down there is really interesting. Safeguarding and securing cyberspace. And it's interesting because there is nothing that we do across any of our components any longer that does not impact or is not impacted by cyberspace. We are all in a fight today, trying to protect our data, trying to protect our systems, and at the same time, trying to get legitimate work done. So this is becoming more and more important. And at the bottom of this rack is the operational directives. I won't go into those in any detail, other than to say that our most recent one is Presidential Policy Directive 8 on national preparedness. And just as a reminder, that tells us that we have to be able to prevent, protect, mitigate, respond, and recover. So that's kind of the framework. I wish it looked so nice when you got out into the field. It doesn't. It's a very, very confused and dynamic situation. We have greater use of technology at the same time that we have more threats and less resources, a very difficult combination. And you all are on the front lines in many of these areas. For example, in globalization and transportation, no one is closer to the action than the Coast Guard. Same with border security and the immigration piece. But here, you know, it's really a tenuous balance because we do want the legitimate flow of goods and services, while at the same time, we want to halt those people or those goods and services that we don't want entering the country. Violent extremism has become even more problematic. We are seeing state-like capabilities in the hands of individuals. What does that portend for Homeland Security? The cyber domain I already spoke about. Jump down to the misuse of technology. The historical perspective. If there is a technology, it has also been used for ill, for nefarious purposes, and we should not expect that to deviate. And then the final one is pushing disaster or natural disasters and pushing beyond design limits. And I think this is very relevant to this group here. So when we look at the 2 sets of pictures, the first one is Deepwater Horizon. And I find this as an interesting case study because when Deepwater Horizon occurred, and many of you here were on the front lines of trying to remediate that issue. But when it occurred, the American people, the call by the press was, let's fix it, let's get the government, let's get the Coast Guard to do the work. And you have to remind people that industry was drilling well beyond design limits. They were already at the edge of their limits. A 4-mile horizontal drilling, using advanced techniques for concrete development, and doing things that were not necessarily industry standards. And so when it failed catastrophically. When it failed, what we had to do was turn to industry and say, industry, you need to fix this. Now, the government has a lot of power. It can fine, it can monitor, it can cajole, it can do a lot of things, but it cannot develop an industry from scratch that it took to fix this. And the next one is Fukushima. Now, the Japanese were not stupid people. They understood the region they lived in. They knew it was dangerous. Unfortunately, they had designed an 8-meter seawall. They had 6 reactors that were 40 years old and almost in need of, they were just at their end of the usable life cycle and in need of refurbishment and decommissioning. They got a 10-meter wave and they lost 4 cores, and they had a catastrophe in terms of their nuclear industry. So a very dynamic situation. Now, you all come from the Department of Homeland Security, so you don't need a lot of reminding about this, but I do want to give you a couple points that might help you think differently about the department. So that wiring diagram up there, that shows you an organization of about 230,000 people. That seems like a big number. It's the 3rd largest cabinet level agency behind Department of Defense and the Veterans Administration. When you add down at the bottom where it says Homeland Security Enterprise and the first responder community, I can get that number to grow to 3.5 million people. But when you think about the requirements for things like response and recovery, for all the different security missions that go on, you have 1% of the population which is responsible for these critical missions. And so it really is a very interesting dynamic when you look at the numbers and you look at, if you will, the troops to task requirements. And notice that we have to function at all levels. And I show it from the local all the way up to the international. It does matter what goes on overseas. Some people are surprised to find out, for example, that science and technology has 12 bilateral negotiations ongoing with countries, foreign countries. Why would we do that? Because they have technologies we want, they have information we want, we trade in those ways. So it's very much international to local. I would like to spend the next couple slides talking a little bit about science and technology and the way we do business. And I think this is important because hopefully you can take something away from this. And what we've developed in science and technology are trying to proliferate across all components that we attempt to assist is this idea of a value-added proposition, that we are operationally focused. That is, we try to understand your requirements and translate those into operational capabilities. That doesn't necessarily mean widgets. It could mean a change in procedures, a knowledge product. It could mean gaining efficiencies, business process reform. The list is endless. We also seek to be innovative. That is, to bring important new ideas forward. And I was really heartened to hear the discussion today on the Arctic. I mean, I think it's exactly the way that we ought to be talking, and now is the time to talk about it. We have this transitional period. Some say it's 10 years away, some say it's 30 years away. I don't know when it is, but I know it's coming, and it's great that we're having that dialogue. And then partnerships, and that is building partnerships across the department. It's building it across state and local, within our interagency, that is in Washington, across all the cabinet level departments. Industry is a partner. The list goes on and on. Universities, as we know so well from our Centers of Excellence programs, are tremendous partners bringing extraordinary value. And so with that as our value-added proposition, we then take on board and say, how can we understand what the components' requirements are? And we do that by way of a systems analysis. This one shows a systems analysis for borders. And it starts with understanding all the different threats, the things that might cause us to have to activate parts of the system. And then we decompose, once we know the threats in the environment, we decompose those into what are the steps. In this case, we're saying the steps are to deter, to detect and track, to classify, interdict, and then resolve. So if that's our system, then we can begin to decompose that and say, where do I have gaps? Where am I lacking information? What technologies could assist? And so what you see in the graphic down below is a very much systems engineering approach, a very typical systems engineering approach, which begins with defining the problem and then coming up with your gap analysis and characterization. That is, to begin to solve the problem and find those technologies, capabilities, efficiencies that can be brought in. and finally putting in prototypes and doing testing and then implementing in full scale. So going from a systems analysis to fielding operationally relevant capabilities. Now let me pull this back and talk now specifically about the maritime domain and the management that we're talking about. And this is, again, a very crowded slide, but I think it's worth looking at all the different areas that we need to think about. So in the center, look at the challenges. We have 2 long land borders. We are fortunate that we have good neighbors by and large, and we have cordial relations with those neighbors. We do happen to have on the northern border the longest land border in the world. Notice 300 ports of entry, something to consider. And as you go around and look at some of this, start with the cargo theft incidents. They're all going up. Cargo itself is problematic, tracking and maintaining control of that and ensuring that there is the free flow of legitimate goods and services, but we are keeping those things out that give us concern. And notice the global cargo threat of theft. As you go around, passenger screening. We're worried about keeping out passengers who may not have legitimate business here, who have no reason to be in our country. Coming around to Florida, small dark vessels, actually mini submarines that are built in the jungles of Colombia, hand-laden to water, and then put in the water, loaded with narcotics or people who might be trying to get into the country illegally, and transiting up into Florida, where their cargo can be offloaded. Our supply chain security, the need to be able to understand where is that supply chain, how to secure it, where are those key technologies that we want to protect. We want to do this without impeding commerce. We want to do it at a reduced cost. As you come up, resilience and natural disasters. Again, we need little reminding. This graphic is New York and New Jersey. It's power outage, and it's about a week after, and it shows that we had 7 million people almost a week after who were out of power in one of the most populous places in the United States. And then finally, inland waterways and international collaboration. So here are some principles, and I've talked about some of these, so we can go through these fairly rapidly. First, expediting the flow of trade and travel. Very self-explanatory. We want to stop threats early. In the Cold War, we talked about having layered defenses. We want to have layered defenses here too, to make sure that we stop bad guys from getting on an aircraft or loading a cargo container onto a ship if it shouldn't be coming in. We also have to recognize and act on this idea between security and verification versus protection for civil rights and civil liberties. At the end of the day, we are a nation of laws, and this is what we are made of. We want to optimize the detection interdiction chain. You know, today we can know a lot about what's coming in, but in many respects, it's hard to do the interdiction. So we have to get smarter about where do we position ourselves so we can interdict. And we want to focus on solutions that have a maximum impact for efficiency and capability. And collaboration is key. We cannot afford to do it alone. No one entity within our government can. And then I'd like to just share with you 3 operational settings that I think are worth thinking about. First is at the ports of debarkation, our international partners. And here we're working very hard, and I say we across the department, because I know, for example, from my work with CBP, Customs and Border Protection, and ICE, that we are working so hard to ensure that we know what is happening, and we make sure that we're keeping those illegitimate sources of goods and services out. But it's a huge volume to be screened, and it's a very complex issue. As you go to the coastal areas, this is where the Coast Guard is so integrally involved with ensuring the security and indeed the defense of the perimeter of our country. And we have a very small number of interdicting assets and a very, very large search area. And so this is why things like the National Security Cutter are so important to our homeland security. And then as you look at the ports of entry, another problem, huge volumes to be screened, scanned, and inspected. And how do you do that, keeping the security? So these are the 3 nodes. Think about those because somebody within the Department of Homeland Security is exercising authority over those nodes. Now this is a little hard to read, but I want to show you an analysis that we did looking at cargo flow through a U.S. port of entry. And it gives you some idea of how we're trying to optimize that flow. So if you look at the left side on the top, that's the threat assessment, the primary. That's not done with hands-on. That's about people doing analysis of loads that they're seeing, and they're essentially doing intel work there. And there's a targeting center involved and bills of lading, trying to do the analysis. The second one over in the yellow is the non-intrusive inspection. Think of those as the scanners and screeners that you would use to do your radiographic imaging, for example. And then the next one over is the manual inspection. And as you go from left to right, it becomes more timely, more costly, and it requires considerably more assets. And so as we've done this analysis, what we are trying to do, and go right to the bottom on this chart, and look at this, if you will, green lane concept. So it starts with being able to get our targeting centers to understand more early on in the process which cargo, which people we should allow just to go through with just having to show a couple documents and move forward. And we want to have less dependence on the second and third boxes, the non-intrusive inspection and the manual inspection. This will increase the velocity of the throughput, while at the same time, we believe that it will increase security. So this is the way science and technology is thinking about the problem and trying to work with the Coast Guard and the R&D Center and others on these issues. I want to give you a couple examples just of some technologies. This is our northern border test bed. It's between Canada and the United States. I think this is a great example of using the full depth and breadth of different capacities to gain outcomes. So in the military, we always talked about this .mel-PF, and it's a concept that's being integrated into Homeland Security as well. But that stands for doctrine, organization, training, materiel, leadership, personnel, and facilities. And if you look at Northern Border Test Bed, we're actually doing all those things. We've installed a common radar, and we're both making use of the signals that are coming off that radar. We've worked together to develop new procedures so that we can better share information, but also so that we can better target and run patrols more efficiently and effectively. We've got joint work going on up there on all areas of the .mel-PF. The next, I can't get off the stage without mentioning Armor and Protect, the port resilience system. But here's what I wanted to say. Many of you know about this. Using game theory, an approach that makes it look like we actually have more patrolmen, more ships on the water, when all you've done is to randomize through use of an algorithm. Here's what I wanted to tell you about this. We are using this same approach on the southern border, a land border with Customs and Border Protection in the Rio Grande Valley, so that we can optimize down there the work that we're doing with the agents. And we see savings of up to 50% on patrols, an extraordinary outcome which will return agents back to the field. I also wanted to talk just briefly about the first responders and the data request from Hurricane Sandy. You know, when we were in the early stages of the response and recovery from Superstorm Sandy, the Secretary was hosting nightly calls. And on these calls were Admiral Papp, there was Craig Fugate, and they were all talking about what they were doing and what was being accomplished. And I've asked my people to start collecting up the lessons learned. But look at the data requests and just correlate in your mind how many of those are related to the maritime domain that we talk about and just kind of rolls off our tongue. The search and the rescue, the extent of the flooding and surge, status of flood protection measures, transportation status. I heard at one point Admiral Papp having to respond to the Secretary about opening of the waterways so that we could get the large ships in to bring in the fuel for the recovery effort. I mean, these are real world, and so we have to figure out how to do this in a more automated way. And the S&T has taken on the mission to do a big data, if you will, discovery, where we try to figure out how do we more effectively share all of these things, to include some of the more non-traditional, such as social media. So more to follow on that. And I'll end here, some conclusions. And I just want to let you know, I do recognize that your operations, your missions are highly diverse. What goes on in the Arctic bears little resemblance to what is going to go on in the southern part of Florida, where we're looking for drugs. And likewise, it'll bear little resemblance to what goes on in places like Galveston, Texas, a large cruise line terminal. But still, we can design systems and learn about the different operational environments. We do have to watch what we're doing so that we don't adversely impact what goes on with the legitimate flow of goods and services. And we recognize that we have a highly adaptive adversary, and this adversary is continuing to look for new ways to interdict. Some may be virtual, others may be physical. We will see competition across all different types of domains. And as we go forward in the science and technology, doing the work of research and development, it's absolutely imperative that we have an opportunity to have a dialogue with, if you will, the operators who, at the end of the day, have to secure and defend our borders and our way of life. So with that, I will stop. If we have time for questions, I'd be happy to take one or two.
We do have time for questions.
Okay, great. I normally have a 3-question rule. Have you ever heard of this? So the 3-question rule is that I am required to take 3 questions, and I don't leave the stage until I get 3. I've been known to stand for literally hours waiting on this question. No takers?
I'll take one. I'll do one.
Okay.
I was caught a little bit off guard by your comment regarding the increase in cargo losses and thefts. In our experience in the ports, we've seen a reduction within the port community of that. And so when you mentioned that there's been an increase in loss of cargo, are you talking about across the entire logistics chains, or are you talking specifically about the port community?
Well, it was, that particular statistic was cargo lost within the port system.
Well, the port system is often talking about the trucks that leave
Right.
the port and so forth.
Right.
Because we've seen a tremendous reduction in losses within the port
Within the port,
themselves.
right. No, we would agree. It's more, it's the whole system.
Thank you.
One of the post 9/11 challenges was how to, in the way that was done during the Cold War, integrate the power of academia, the power of the American university system into solving national and international problems. Could you give us a status report on how well Homeland Security as an issue has been integrated, or how well you feel the university or academic community is supporting Homeland Security?
So that's a great question, and it's very appropriate given that we're here at a Center of Excellence. So let me give you some statistics first. We spend about $36 million a year. We have 12 Centers of Excellence. We have 209 universities that are affiliated with those 12 Centers of Excellence. They self-organize, and they do work on specific areas. I think one of the areas, and I'm not just saying this because I'm here at Create, which is focused on the Maritime area, but I think one of the areas where we've seen the most success is in the Maritime domain. I mean, we talked about Create, we talked about the algorithm. There were also some successes. The Chapel Hill, North Carolina, University of North Carolina University Center, they have a wave action model that was able to predict for Hurricane Irene what was going to go on, and based on that, they recommended to the Coast Guard that the Coast Guard jump their headquarters out of the Tidewater area. They said, you'll be underwater for 18 hours. They listened to the center. The Coast Guard did, in fact, jump their headquarters, and the place was flooded. So there's another very interesting. But you know, there are so many success stories. We've had a Center of Excellence in Texas A&M that assisted us with development of a recombinant foot and mouth disease vaccine. Recombinant means we built it. It was not if you will, naturally occurring pathogen. And they built for us the recombinant material, the genetic material, which we then took up to Plum Island and we used in challenge tests against foot and mouth disease, which has been a scourge on the livestock industry. Not here in this country, thank goodness, but it has in other nations around the world. A single case of foot and mouth disease here in this country is a $1 billion event for the first day. We have a $1 trillion industry in this country in agriculture, and we pay actually very little to secure it. And our university at Texas A&M they did a superb job. That vaccine is now licensed and is available for procurement worldwide. So it's a big deal, and we think we're getting more than what we're paying for. I shouldn't say that. Every time I do that, Matt kind of goes, oh! But I think we are getting one heck of a deal on the university program. We also have within Department of Homeland Security, we do university programs, science and technology focused, but there is a university programs office which is at the departmental level. We work very closely with them, and I think we do very good outreach. Could we do better? Yes. Do we want to continue to get this institutionalized across a broader space? Absolutely. But we're very comfortable with where we are. Yes, please.
Admiral Brooks took my question. No, but it was related. I was going to ask from an S&T perspective what you think the top couple accomplishments have been delivering solutions to the components. And I know you mentioned from Centers of Excellence, but as a whole, what solutions have you delivered to the components?
So we feel like there are a lot of interesting solutions. I mean, one solution has been with respect to what we talked about, foot and mouth disease. We've also done the bioterror chemical risk assessment models. Those are actually used to drive countermeasure development. So we think those are very important. We have done a lot of work in borders and maritime. We think that's an area where we've done considerable analysis that has paid big dividends. There's some little things. For example, you probably have never heard of it, but it's a backboard cover for first responders. When first responders would go to an accident scene, they would put the victim onto a backboard. The backboard then had to be cleaned after the victim was put into the medical facilities, and there was a great chance for cross-contamination. Today we have a very simple solution. It costs us about $100,000 to get it designed, approved, and then commercialized. But it's just a light Tyvek cover. You just take it, throw it away, and there's no more chance of cross-contamination from the backboard. So pretty simple. We also are industry leaders in things like standards development. May seem strange, but we've put out standards for white powder. What do you do as a first responder if you come upon a white powder incident? So as not to make sure that you don't contaminate yourself and become a victim, as well as protecting populations, and also to ensure that there's viable material that we can pick up and use for forensics so that we can prosecute. Remember, we are an organization of law enforcement at the end of the day. So there are a lot of these that are, they seem rather small, but there's one on a daily basis, for example, that you use repeatedly if you do anything on the internet. It's called Domain Name Server Security, shortened to DNSSEC. Every time you get on the web and you go to a website, you double click on there, and if you want to ensure that you're going to the site that you think, well, DNSSEC is operational and it ensures, it does a little battle handover, if you will, where it exchanges security and it tells you that you've gotten to the right place. So very, very small in terms of the visibility, but huge in terms of its global effect. It cost us about $10 million to develop it, and it's being fielded across the globe. So a lot of these kind of, I guess I would say, things that don't always make the news, but that have pretty large payoffs. Okay, you guys are off the hook. You got the 3 in. Okay. Well, thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks.
Deputy Undersecretary
Thank you so
Gerstein.
much.
We appreciate very much you coming and being with us today and for your excellent remarks.
Well, thanks. And good luck at the rest of the conference.
Okay, thank you.